The task of commemorating each casualty individually was a vast undertaking, and the commissioners realised very early on that if they were to ensure equality of treatment and complete the task in a reasonable time, they would need to limit the amount of information that was engraved. They agreed the principles with each of the member governments. The layout of military details was standardised, a number of religious emblems were chosen, and space for a personal inscription was included in the design. But each member government made decisions about how those principles would be delivered for their casualties. For example, the New Zealand government believed that to ensure equality of treatment, it would be best not to have a personal inscription. The Canadian government took a different approach and agreed to pay the engraving charges for all the personal inscriptions for their casualties. During the 1920s, the Commission, or the member government acting on our behalf, sent out a final verification form to the last known address of the next of kin of each casualty. We took the name and address from the details they had given to the military authorities, and so in many cases it was some years out of date. This meant that not all those families who were sent a form actually received them. Many had moved house, young widows with children to care for had remarried, or elderly parents had themselves passed away. Even when the family received the form, some did not return it at all. For some, receiving the form meant that they finally had to confront the terrible reality of the death of their loved one. Others felt a deep resentment towards the authorities and refused to comply with the official requests. Many struggled to complete the paperwork, as they had only limited education and were only able to sign their name. Some families, particularly those who had lost their breadwinner, were anxious about whether they could afford the engraving fee that was charged for each letter. Not every casualty had a known grave. For those commemorated on the memorials to the missing, there was no space for a religious emblem or a personal inscription on the memorial panels. We ensure that any remains recovered today are treated with great respect and dignity. In France, Commonwealth War Graves Commission staff will recover the remains and preserve any artefacts, so that the service authorities have every chance of identifying the individual. Whether they're identified or not, they will be reburied in the Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemetery near where they fell, with honour. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission commemorations team ensure that the principles that were established at the foundation of the Commission are applied to casualties recovered today in the same way as they were to those who were buried 100 years ago. We will bury them alongside their comrades with a headstone bearing as much information as we have been able to establish. Where they have been identified and family members can be traced, we will ask them to complete the final verification form.